let's kick this thing off. We're continuing. We're in the second half of Unit 8 in the Morning Shiur for the Menucha of Surname Dangur and Sir Moses Metifiori. We are in this unit talks about focuses on the mitzvah of eating and eating it right, eating it well. So the Mishnah says, well, how do you eat right and eat well? But lo yasuch yain the chometz, sachu et hashemen. So it's not that no one uses wine as a lubricant or whatever they want to use it for, right? But obviously that was something that was done. Otherwise, the Mishnah wouldn't have to point it out, right? I was not talking about crazy people, I'm talking about normal use, but not normal enough. The wine should be used at its ultimate in the ultimate use, as opposed to oils that have always been used as body as lotions. So we may let the oils could be used as lotions. I'm not going to go into this sentence right now. We're going to go very deep into it in Unit 9. Now, let's see a couple of Rambams. I want to focus on this Rambam, these two. But let's read the whole thing. So we learn from here that you could use it for other uses. We're going to go deeper into that Unit 9. I'm not going into that right now. I just pointed out that there are a few words here in the Rambam I'm skipping. We will get back to them in Unit 9 about all the other uses that are not eating. We're focusing on eating, which now Bet and Gimel are more interesting to us. What is the right way to eat? Now the question is, how strict do you have to be about this? I'll explain what I mean. Let's say zucchini. Are you allowed to eat? What do you guys think? What's the normal way of eating zucchini? Cooked or uncooked?
Cooked.
Cooked. All right. So you're allowed to eat now.
Unless it's a crudité appetizer that you put into a dip.
Yes. Right. So is that allowed? Right? Do I say that's not the right? It's not so clear, right? I'm not saying right whether the halacha would be that or not, but right. And as we can ask about many things, as I wouldn't ask this a question about potatoes, right? Potatoes must be eaten cooked, and cucumbers must be eaten raw, right? But there are going to be many things that it's not going to be so pashut. Many things aren't going to be so simple. Potato. And then we have a surprising Mishnah. You'll know that the Rambam keeps on comparing the interesting thing, which is kind of upsetting when you're learning Shmita, when you're learning Shvit. Here's the funny thing: in the old days, Tuma Masel Sheni was something they had all the time, as opposed to Shvi'it was something they had once every 7 years. So the relevant Mishnayot, the Mishnayot that dealt with how to do things right, focused more on Tuma Masel Sheni because that's what people were doing. Shemitah, once in 7 years, you have to think about. So the Mishnayot don't elaborate quite as much about Shemitah as they did about Tuma Masel Sheni. Right? See the irony here. In our world, Tuma Masel Sheni, who does that, right? But in the Mishnah's world, Tuma Masel Sheni was a daily thing, right? Shemitah was once in 7 years. So most of the elaboration davka appear in the Mishnayot and Trumot, and not in the context of Shvi'it. But it says every time that it's just like Shvi'it. It's like the Mishnah here said. Right? Saying you have to use Shvi'it the same way you use Tuma Masel Sheni. Which leads us to the following Mishnah. Let's focus on these two. These are fairly easier to understand. This is what we call silan, right? You agree? Would you say that a prevalent use of dates is to make silan? Fairly prevalent, right? Is it most of these? All right. What about cider out of apples? We're not talking about wine. We're talking about cider, right? Obviously. How prevalent is that? So you're not allowed to do that with truma. You're not doing it with Truma. The assumption is when I need to learn the halachot of Shvit, I have to compare it to Truma because I have no other source. I have no other indication of what the correct use is. So the question is, how can I extrapolate from this Mishnah to Shemitah? The assumption at this point will be you're not allowed to turn dates into silan. You're not allowed to make apple cider out of Shemitah fruit. Why not? Shemitah apples. Why not? These uses are prevalent enough, right? All right, it's a debate.
Not.
Maybe not. Right? All right. So let's start with the aspect of prevalence. What about making beer and whiskey? It is a difficult question because what do you think most wheat in the world is used for?
I'd say bread.
Bread, hands down, right?
But
If you
barley,
count,
maybe.
what? Oh, barley, right? Barley, I think half is used for human consumption, half for animal consumption, right?
And wheat is also used for let them eat cake.
For the plebes, you're saying. So yes, I think wheat, in other words, I wouldn't say that you have to use wheat, right? You'll agree that you don't have to use wheat for bread. You can use it for cakes. You can use it for pretzels. You can use it for biscuits, right? I think that all of those be in the same category, right? Let's turn them into wheat, right? But are you allowed to make whiskey, which is fundamentally different, right? What about barley? Barley is a more difficult question, right? Barley, people put that in stew, in cholent, and whatever. You give barley to animals to eat as well. Is more barley used for beer than for those? I don't know, but is the issue more or is the issue prevalent enough? I'll tell you, I'll be honest. This very much bothered me. Everyone starts from this Mishnah about creating silan. Why does that bother me? Who can think? Why does it bother me? I'll give you a hint. According to some shitot, the chiyuv d'oraita of Truma to Maasrot is only from very specific fruit. What fruit?
Shiva minim.
Shiva minim. Okay, so are tamarim within that? Where does it say it?
Zayt shemen udavash.
Udvash. You see the problem?
So that seems to be the major part of it, yeah.
Right, and the pasuk says this is. I'm not even calling it tamarim. I'm calling it dvash. But you're not to make dvash out of it when it's truma, right? That's so. I'll be honest. That I found that very disturbing. Because strange, right? All right, but okay. So let's see what Aruch HaShulchan does with beer and whiskey. יש להסתפק מותר לתת שעורים בשיכר בשביעית וכן לעשות מדגן יין שרף. I think he's talking about whiskey here. וכיוצא בזה, משום דין לך שינוי מבריאתן כזה. Right? It's totally changed. It's completely different. Right? If you wouldn't know if I'd say, well, what did I make my whiskey out of? I made it out of wheat. Really? Really? Wheat? Right? It's totally changed. עוד דילמה, כיוון דרך העולם בכך, חווה קרק שדרכו לאכול מבושל שמותר לבשלו. Right? You can say, well, this is the normal use. Is it the prevalent use? Well, sorry, someone just slipped and fell. Oh my gosh. Sorry. That was scary. Right. אגב, שם אין דרכו לאכול חי ואין לאכלו חי, וכאן אדרבה עיקרן לפת. מכל מקום, כיוון שדרך העולם בכך, אי אפשר לעשות שיכר ויש באופן אחר, מותר. מה שפירות אחרים אסור לסוחתם, כמו שכתוב בתרומות, זהו מפני שאין דרך העולם להוציא ממשכין. אבל שיכר ויש, הרי כל העולם עושים כן. So, right, Baruch Hashem, in Israel, we have many very good, many fine breweries, and they're used. There's a very good use. It's a very high quality use of barley. On the other hand, that's not the natural state. At what point do you say this is prevalent enough that you're allowed to use it for something that's not its natural state? By the way, there's an interesting assumption here that generally speaking, you'd want to keep things as close to their natural state as you can, right? And then any change would have to be justifiable based on whether other people use it. Now, the interesting thing is this: when we learn in Hilchot Shabbat, the Mishnah says when schita deoraita, right? Dash, melechet dash, that you're what's it called? You're mefik, that you're
Extracting.
extracting. Thank you. So I want exactly. You're extracting, right, something from your fruit. That's melechet dash, right? So the extraction is the isur. The only things that are asur when it comes to that kind of extraction are
Oil and grapes, yeah.
oil and grapes, right? We've mentioned this in the past, right? Oil and grapes. So what? And now the question is, what about, right? We mentioned this a bit, but again, Tropicana oranges, right? Florida oranges that are used most prevalently for orange juice, right? Would we say, well, in Chazal's time, they didn't have quite the plenty that we have. So in their time, no one else you wouldn't create any other, you wouldn't extract such a thing because it would be a waste of oranges, right? Or do you say that, and therefore nowadays it's different? Or do you say, no, fundamentally an orange is an orange, and fundamentally a grape is wine in potentia. So that's going to touch a lot of what we're going to discuss now. The same idea comes up with here with whiskey and beer. Whiskey and beer are not the natural extraction of the wheat and the barley, but it is prevalent, and that's why Aruch HaShulchan is a bit. He's not sure what kind of prevalence is required. Rav Kook seems to be machmir. I'd like you guys to be the judge. Kol shinui tzura she'eino nahug al pi rov. Kol shinui b'tosefta ketniot shel truma nosim mem tchinin. They like to make tchina out of legumes, right? Right? You can make. I mean, it says tchinin here doesn't only mean tchina made out of sesame. It can also be hummus. You crush. It can also be other things that I've seen other kinds of things. Right? You have. I don't know. You have. Something for peas. I saw a thing for. Right? So you can have all kinds of other. But like greens, but like pesto. Right? Well, what do you say about all those things? So it's not so clear. Mistama in the charov. So Rav Kook says, now here I was torn. What does it mean by rov? So I need to recognize what is 51% of the use of parsley, for example, or of you see my problem? Right? If you're going to say 51% of the use of tchina, well, of hummus. What about hummus or sesame? What do you think is most sesame in the world? What is it used for? Or most sesame in Israel? What is most sesame in Israel used for? I assume most sesame in Israel is used for tchina. But what about beans that can also be made into a paste? I imagine far, far less, right? All right, so now the question is, when he says rov, does he actually mean 51%? You see my question? Does he mean, when he says rov, he means prevalent, or he means 51%? So you have to go to the market and figure it out. Now, again, 51% is not a good number, because if this year is 51%, next year is going to be 49. So that number doesn't even mean anything, right? You see what I'm saying? If it's a 60-40 distribution, so next year the market could change that small change, and they'll go 40-60 the other way. So what do you mean by rov? Do you mean 70%? Do you mean 90%? It's not so clear to me. It would seem, based on this, that you would not be allowed to make whiskey. What about beer? I'm not sure. Check how prevalent it is. Right? All right. The Chazon Ish adds a very important aspect to this whole thing. Chazon Ish says the following. Chazon Ish, he holds in the context of dash, what I mentioned before, right? Extracting liquids from something. Mashma b'Shabbat shekol parot zulat zeitim v'anavim einam odim l'schita afilu tutim v'rimonim. Meaning, if once upon a time no one would create orange juice, and now we do create orange juice, so then halacha in Hilchot Shabbat would change. Because again, the halacha doesn't change. The halacha is very simple. Whatever is normally extracted as a juice, you're not allowed to extract as a juice d'oraita. In their days, it was only olives and grapes. Nowadays, it's also oranges and also grapefruits.
What about lemons?
Lemons for sure, right? Now, lemons has a whole other
But
sugya.
even then, lemons never used for anything else but it's juice.
So the Rosh has a tshuva about lemons. I'm not going to go deeply into this right now. I'll just say in the word, the Rosh has this hafuch thing. The Rosh says, since the lemon juice, right? The lemon is not lemonade, it's lemon juice, is never used on its own. It's just an additive. And that's why it doesn't have chashivut mitzad atzmo. That's why it's not doraita. The Rosh says, right, as opposed to the grapes, right, you just let it ferment and it becomes wine, right? The olive oil, you extract the oil is there. The lemon juice you can't use on its own. You have to add it to, it's only an additive. It doesn't have chashivut to turn into doraita. The next question is, does that mean you're also allowed to, is there also Yisur Drabanan? That's a whole sugya. Shulchan Aruch says that you're allowed. It's a complicated sugya there in the context of lemons, but right. So lemons is a good point, but the Rosh uses it the other way, right? So since lemons can only be used for their juice, and their juice is to be used as an additive, not unto themselves, so it doesn't count. But back to us.
From Shemitah point of view,
you
that's the only use for lemon.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So Shemitah point of view, lemons for sure. So lemons are easy, right? Lemons are definitely used. So you could definitely use your Shemitah lemons for juice, because what else are you can do with that, right? You might ask, are you allowed to make lemon liqueur?
Limoncello.
Because on the one hand, from Shemitah grapes, Shemitah lemons, of course, right? Are you allowed to make cherry liqueur out of Shemitah cherries? I think the answer is no. Just like you can't make silan, right? But lemons are an additive, are fundamentally an additive, right? So maybe in gankacha it's an additive, so you might as well make whatever you want with it, right? So lemons really are a bigger question there. But he says, all right, what about that tutim v'rimonim? So I've seen that they do make pomegranate juice, right? I've seen it. You can see it everywhere. Is that the prevalent use? In Chazal's time, definitely not. Chazal's time didn't have the plenty that we have. What about in our time? I don't think so. I don't think it's prevalent enough. I think far more people eat pomegranates than people drink pomegranates. But with orange juice, I'm not sure.
I'm amazed that he says, if nishtana davar nishtana adin, the Chazon Ish.
Oh, so the Chazon Ish, so that's why I'm elaborating on this point. And you need to reach this sentence where he really explains what he's saying. But I'll just say, I expressed right away, he doesn't mean that the way halacha works is the definition remains. The ramification changes, the definition remains, and that's a very important distinction, right? The definition is whatever is normally used to extract the liquids from, right? Whatever is normally used for its liquids, for liquid extraction. Now, mimele, if the norm changes, halacha changes. Not because halacha changes, chalila. Halacha never changes. It's just the halachic definition said whatever is normally used. So if the norm changes, the ramification changes, not the definition. So he goes from there to, he says he wants to say what Dr. Brolowitz said, right? That oranges will be the kula or the chumra. Why the kula? Chot Shabbat, it'll be the chumra. But Shemitah wise, it could be the kula, right? That's exactly what he says. We'll explain the Rashba later on. Mr. Tapuz, he says, look, I don't know. I'm not sitting in the market and figuring this out, but broadly speaking, there definitely is a case to be made that oranges are prevalently used for orange juice. Mimele, on Shabbos, this could be an Isur D'Oraita. Shabbos, nefkuda bezelekula, ibutar sachtan b'shvit. Right? This is the important point I want to make. Rav Kook, Aruch HaShulchan wasn't sure, and Rav Kook sounded quite certain of himself that the question is, what is Ruba de Alma? He says the issue is not Ruba de Alma. Ela, what the norm is, as long as it's normal enough. And then he points out a very, very important thing, which I actually used yesterday in a very, very different context. And I'll tell you the context, and I'm apologizing, Rosh. It actually is about Hilchot Vila. So like this. That's the following question. The woman said that her hair is very, very curly, and she puts a head covering on, and that makes the hairs tie onto themselves. And then she has a very big problem, because every time she wants to go to the mikveh, she has to spend 2 hours getting these curls straightened out and getting all the knots off. And it's a very, very big tircha. And the question is there any room to be makeup? I'm not going to say what the bottom line halacha is. I'm just going to give one important point about this. When we say there's a halacha in Hilchot Nida about what are most women makpid on, right? A very good shine. There's a halacha in Hilchot Nida. When you want to define what is considered a chatzitza, you have to go by what is the norm, right? So here I have a very big problem, because the norm is for women to make sure that their hair doesn't have knots. Mimela, a woman always has to make sure that her hair, right, to brush her hair out properly before she dips, to make sure that there are no knots there, because that's the norm. But here I want to make the following claim. The norm that I'm talking about is the norm of women who have straight hair. What about the women who have this kind of curly hair? Would you say that the norm there is the same? Because this woman isn't like the other women. She has a different situation. Mimela, you can't say, well, what do normal people do? Because she says, well, I'm not in the category. You might ask, what do men do? Say, yeah, but I'm not a man, I'm a woman. The way I treat my hair is different, right? Same can be said about women with curly hair as opposed to women with straight hair, right? The women with curly hair who have her situation, what do they do? That's the question. How much are they makpid to not have knots in their hair, right? This could be relevant in a few other places in halacha. We have the similar thing in Hilchot Shabbat in the context of carrying. The context of muktzah. That was where it was. In the context of muktzah, if you have something that was not designated as to be used before Shabbat, so you're allowed to use it even if it wasn't designated before Shabbat, if it's normally used. Okay, define normally. So the Gemara says it depends on, so whatever, it's the Rishonim explain the Gemara, that the question is what's normal by you would depend on what would you do in their situation. For example, the Gemara says, if you're in a certain place in which there are many camels, people raise camels, the assumption is that you need certain plants to feed the camels with. In other places, you might have the same plants, but no one uses those plants because they don't have camels. So it's not a matter of, it's not those people are crazy. You do the same thing if you're in the same situation. Same would happen here. If someone from the Middle Ages would end up in Florida today, right? If someone from Chazal's time and then in Florida today and see that they're making a whole, that they're creating tons and tons of orange juice, they'd say the initial inclination would be to say, what in the world are you doing? You're crazy. You're wasting all these oranges on juice. Who in the world would do such a thing? Then they go to the field and they see how many tons of oranges they have. They say, all right, that does change things, right? In other words, if you were in the same situation, you do the same. That's the important thing, right? So Chazish says that the halacha changes. What he means is, right, the mitziut changes. The facts on the ground are fundamentally different. You can't tell me what do most people who have one orange tree and they don't have any other oranges in their country, what do they do? Of course they eat the oranges and don't make fruit out of them, as opposed to when you have fields and fields of the things and you're mass producing tons of orange juice, you're not going to say, I can't waste it on orange juice, I need to, right? That's the Chazonish's definition. So I just want to sum up and then we'll hear of Baruch. That Rav Kook, was debated about this. Rav Kook seemed very clear about you need to have the rov people use, and Chazonish says what is normal for that situation. That's the way to look at it.